Well, good morning. It's the morning of Thursday, 15th of March, 2018. And the title of this morning's broadcast is Theresa May's Fracking Fear Porn Exposed. Now, it's going to be a relatively short broadcast, I think, this morning. But I will be in the studio tonight to broadcast an episode of Humanity versus Insanity at 7:30 p.m. and then Fracking Nightmare at 9 o'clock, and they can be viewed on UK Column Live YouTube channel. Now, this morning the Daily Mail published a headline on their online website, and the headline was "Cold Snap Next Week Puts Britain at the Mercy of Russian Gas Giants as Reserves in Europe Reach Record Lows." Now, it can't have escaped your attention that Theresa May and the UK government have been ramping up the Russian fear porn now for some weeks. But they haven't really succeeded in getting too much traction. And it was perhaps started a couple of months ago now, maybe even a bit longer, by Gavin Williamson, who, of course, when he's finished his paper round each morning, puts on a suit and takes up his other job as Minister of Defence. Now, he started the attacks on the Russians, but that seemed to be a classic wag the dog scenario, because it coincidentally was in parallel with the revelations that he'd had an inappropriate relationship when he was working in the corporate world. So that was a nice little distraction. But it's now getting ramped up big time, and I wouldn't perhaps be normally addressing the bigger picture issues on these morning broadcasts, because the focus obviously is about shutting down the unconventional gas industry in the UK. But I have made the observation on a number of episodes of Fracking Nightmare over the past 2 or 3 years that for Theresa May, or previously David Cameron, to be pushing this agenda, they must know something that we don't, like a pending war with Russia, which could potentially cut off not supplies from Russia, but cut off all supplies. So here, what we are seeing is an outrageous attempt to demonize Russia. Now, I'm pleased to report that, geopolitical analysts I have a lot of respect for are also calling foul on all this fear porn. And of course, it's being ramped up by the allegations, and that's all they are, allegations, that Russia has effected an assassination on British soil of Sergei Skripal. And apparently another Russian was also found dead in mysterious circumstances in London. That's Nikolai Glushkov. So Britain, of course, has a history of assassinations on foreign soil. But it's okay for Britain and the US to do that, but it's not okay if anybody else does it. Not that I'm suggesting for one moment that Russia did actually perpetrate these crimes, because there is no evidence. And in fact, the Organisation for the Prevention of Chemical Warfare has requested samples of the alleged substance, and the British government has so far refused to provide those substances. And if anybody wants to get another insight into this, take a look at Craig Murray's blog on the subject. Now, Craig Murray is the former British ambassador to Uzbekistan, and he was demonized by the Tony Blair government for having the audacity to try and blow the whistle on the Uzbekistani government's torture regime, where they were extracting information under torture, passing that information to the UK and the US. But Craig Murray was making the observation that basically this was being done as a means of extracting funding for the Uzbekistani government at the time. So Craig Murray was demonized, but now he fulfills the role of being a critical eye on the geopolitical agenda. And he calls this another Iraqi WMD moment. And the false flag elements go back a long way. My own first-hand experience in Kuwait in 1991 was what led me to come to the realization the depths to which the deep state will go to further their globalist agenda. So here we have a push to alienate Russia, not just from the UK and the US, but also Europe. Now, it seems that Donald Trump isn't falling for this, and, you know, allegedly one of the reasons he decided to can Rex Tillerson was Rex Tillerson's exclamation that Russia was indeed responsible for this attack on Sergei Skripal in the UK. Well, Russia does indeed supply gas to Germany. In fact, 40% of Germany's gas comes from Russia. And although the British media are stating that Germany and France are in support of Britain's stance over this incident, that's actually not the case. And both France and Germany have stated that, you know, they will remain cautious about making any statements until such time as they see the evidence. Now, call it a hunch. I doubt any evidence is going to manifest. And, you know, it's also, of course, somewhat coincidental that this event in Salisbury should occur just a few miles from Porton Down, which is the UK's Chemical Warfare Research Centre. So, I'm not suggesting that I know what occurred, but what I am making the observation of is that the evidence that's in the public domain does not yet support the hypothesis being put forward by the British government that this was a Russian assassination on British soil. And as you know, a certain Russian diplomat has observed, you know, what benefit would Russia actually get from perpetrating such an event at this particular juncture, when it's actually trying to nurture, improve relations with the European Union and with the West in general? Well, consider that there is a deeper agenda here. Consider that perhaps the UK or the globalists pulling the strings over the UK government are looking to hurt Russia. Because if they can get Germany and France to put sanctions on Russia, then of course it will affect the Russian economy. It will also affect, you know, the German economy and German industry in a big way. So could this be Britain's way of getting a bargaining chip in the Brexit negotiations? You know, this is a dirty, dirty game. So, you know, we have to look at all the pieces of the jigsaw and not necessarily jump to conclusions, but at least keep an open mind, because in the interests of epistemological integrity, then, you know, until we know something to be a definitive fact, we have to keep open the possibility that something else may indeed be the case. So let's just take a look here at the actual situation, because of course you've got the likes of UKOG, which is the unconventional gas industry mouthpiece in the UK, jumping on the bandwagon, taking a leaf out of the Rahm Emanuel book and never letting a good crisis go to waste. So the sociopathic PR department of UKOG puts out tweets yesterday saying, hey, you know, if Russia's going to have the gas cut off, then, you know, look no further than us, because we can get it out of the UK shale reserves. You sick motherfrackers. Well, let's just take a look at the facts of the situation, because, you know, I pulled up the government's own statistics, which were updated on the 22nd of February, just so, what's that, 3 weeks ago. And let's have a look at the gas imports and where they actually come from. Well, this is in gigawatt hours, but Norway was by far and away the biggest supplier. Now, bear in mind that, you know, we are producing some 45% of our gas needs from British gas resources, primarily offshore. But Norway was the most significant contributor at 393,417 gigawatt hours. Then Belgium, 29,428 gigawatt hours, and then the Netherlands, 20,766. Now, the Netherlands was a much larger supplier, but of course the Netherlands is now reducing its own gas supplies after the phenomenal impact that the gas extraction, and this is conventional gas extraction, has had up in the northeast of the country, around the Groningen area, where subsidence has caused some, well, thousands of properties to be damaged, but some 200 plus to actually be condemned as a result of gas extraction. Now, obviously, you know, looking at the Belgian numbers, then, you know, I knew that Belgium wasn't actually producing that gas. So where was Belgium getting its gas from? Well, it's getting its gas from Germany. A big chunk of its gas from Germany, some from the Netherlands, some from Norway. So then you look at Germany, and of course Germany does get 40-odd% of its gas from Russia. And some of that gas may migrate through into Belgium and into the UK pipelines, which is why the British government acknowledges that something probably less than 1% of our gas supplies does actually come from Russia. But then let's have a look at the liquid nitrogen imports, because, you know, that's also very telling, because Qatar is by far and away the most significant supplier there, with 80% of the UK's liquid nitrogen gas imports coming from Qatar. But then you may be surprised at some of the other countries in the list. Algeria is, I mean, these are a long way short of Qatar, because Qatar's 80%, the rest is 20% combined. Algeria is number 2. Trinidad and Tobago is actually number 3. The USA is number 4, and that's, I guess, primarily INEOS imports from the shale fields of the US. Norway in number 5, Peru number 6, Nigeria number 7, and the Dominican Republic number 8. Now, funnily enough, Russia doesn't appear there at all. So this fear porn that's being ramped up, that oh my God, you know, we got to prepare ourselves because you know, if we upset Russia, they're going to cut off our gas supplies. Now, bear in mind that the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy just last year commissioned a report which looked at the sustainability of Britain's gas supplies in the event of major geopolitical upheaval. And it concluded that basically Britain was in really good shape, and it had potential access to supplies in excess of 200% of demand. So, you know, let's have a look at the facts. The British government assumes that the vast majority of people are simply going to believe whatever it is they read in the mainstream media. And unfortunately, there is no doubt that a large chunk of the population do exactly that. But what the British government is very well aware of is that an increasing percentage of the population is using the powers of discretion and discernment to actually question the de facto bullshit that is pumped out by the lamestream media, just regurgitating the official government line. So it's, as I've said, it's really important. Do your own research and keep an open mind. But at the moment, there is no more evidence to suggest that Russia was implicated in the assassination of Sergei Skripal than there is of Iraq setting the oil wells alight in Kuwait. It's pure conjecture that's pumped out as fact. Yet, I can tell you from first-hand experience that the evidence on the ground would suggest that the well fires were set alight by the British and American special forces. And people say, well, why would they do that? It's very simple: to demonize Saddam, to demonize Iraq, and keep Iraqi oil off of the global market, which of course it did right up until the invasion of 2003. And then when George Bush swooped on to the decks of the US aircraft carrier, and behind him was the big banner saying "Mission Accomplished," that wasn't a statement about the status of the military action. That was a statement about the return of Iraqi oil to the global market, but this time being traded back in US dollars. So the deep geopolitical agenda, I completely understand, is beyond many people's comprehension, because, you know, they don't have the time, even if they have inclination, to really do the research. But it really is time for people to wake up to what's occurring here, because if the agenda is to ignite a conflagration with Russia, then obviously it won't be pretty. And if that is going to be used as a push, amongst many other pushes, to get unconventional gas established in the UK, then of course the long-term result will be the contamination of the water, the soil, the air, the decimation of capability for production of food in the UK. So, you know, one has to take a look at everything that's occurring right now. And just as David Cameron lied to Parliament back in 2013 now, where he tried to get Parliament to support him to bomb Syria back into the dark ages, because Assad had allegedly unleashed chemical weapons on his own civilians. In reality, not a shred of evidence, and the vast majority of independent geopolitical analysts absolutely believe that the chemical attack in 2013 was as a result of an unfortunate release of a chemical weapon by ISIS, and that weapon had been provided by Saudi Arabia. But unfortunately it seems that the instructions hadn't been sent along with it. And of course, you know, the classic Tony Blair, Iraq has weapons of mass destruction back in 2003, and on and on and on. And it is a change, a sea change, a paradigm shift in the way in which people need to view their governments, because anyone who still believes that their government is looking after their best interests simply isn't paying attention. So, you know, where do we go from here? Well, the important thing is not to allow Theresa May free hand to do whatever it is she feels she wants to do, or is told to do, because she actually is intellectually incapable of determining a strategy for herself. She simply relies on the input from those who are effectively put in position by the global banksters and the global corporatists. But they only are able to do what they do because we allow them to do it without any question. But those times have to change. It really has to change. The establishment knows that people are waking up at a phenomenal rate of knots, and they're going to do everything they possibly can to shut it down. You know, Zbigniew Brzezinski, just a few years ago, made a couple of speeches. And in the first speech, he said the biggest obstacle to establishing the one world government is the rapid political awakening of the masses. And actually, a couple of weeks later, he gave a similar presentation, but in that he added, he said the biggest obstacles to the establishment of a one world government is the rapid political and spiritual awakening of the masses. Well, I'll leave it there for today. And if you want to see a bit more of an expansion on this subject, then join me tonight, either for Humanity versus Insanity at 7:30 or Fracking Nightmare at 9 o'clock. And you'll find that on the UK Column Live YouTube channel. Thanks a lot. And if you don't see me tonight, I will catch you tomorrow morning at 8:30. You take care.